They thought they had kidnapped an ordinary woman. Instead, they just made the biggest mistake of their lives by taking hostage one of the deadliest special operations commanders in the U.S. military. Subscribe to the channel and follow along to see how this powerful story unfolds. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell stood in the fluorescent-lit aisle of the grocery store, examining a box of cereal with practiced precision, the same attention to detail she'd used in countless military operations. Her shopping cart contained the basics: protein bars, fresh vegetables, and meal prep essentials. 15 years in Delta Force had taught her to maintain peak physical condition, even during downtime. Her phone vibrated against her hip, displaying an urgent alert about 3 dangerous escapees from a nearby maximum security prison. She made a mental note to review the files later, never imagining these men would soon cross her path. Part 2. The Abduction. The parking lot was eerily quiet as Sarah loaded groceries into her SUV. The first indication of trouble came as a reflection in her car window. 3 men approaching with deliberate stealth. Their orange jumpsuits, partially concealed under stolen jackets, told her everything she needed to know. Sarah quickly assessed her options, noting their positions and makeshift weapons. Instead of immediately neutralizing the threat, her tactical mind saw an opportunity. These were the escaped convicts, and they had just handed her a chance to apprehend them. She allowed them to take her, playing the role of helpless victim perfectly as they forced her into the back of a stolen van. The stolen van lurched forward as Powell navigated through the rain-slicked streets, his inexperience with the vehicle evident in every jerky turn. Sarah Mitchell sat in the back, her wrists bound, but her mind sharp and active. The interior reeked of rust and stale cigarettes, providing her with subtle clues about the vehicle's origin. A construction company's logo had been hastily painted over on the side panels, likely stolen from a work site within the past few hours. She filed away these details, building a mental profile that could prove useful for future investigations. Drake occupied the passenger seat, occasionally barking directions at Powell while maintaining a watchful eye on their captive through the rear-view mirror. Sarah noticed how he gripped his makeshift weapon, a sharpened piece of metal that still bore traces of the prison workshop where it was fashioned. His knuckles were white against the dark metal, betraying an underlying tension that contradicted his confident exterior. 15 years of reading body language in high-stress situations had taught her to spot these subtle tells. Reeves sat beside her in the back, maintaining a careful distance that spoke volumes about his situational awareness. Unlike his companions, he carried himself with a controlled stillness that Sarah recognized from her own training. His eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, taking in details and analyzing potential threats. She counted 3 times when he noticed the patrol cars before his companions, subtly shifting his posture to make himself less visible through the van's windows. This one, she determined, would need to be neutralized first when the time came. The van's path followed a deliberate pattern: main roads to maintain normalcy, followed by strategic turns onto progressively smaller streets. Sarah mapped each turn in her mind, noting landmarks and calculating their approximate distance from the city center. A neon-lit diner, a defunct gas station, an abandoned railway crossing, each location carefully logged in her mental database. Their routes suggested familiarity with local law enforcement patterns, another detail she stored away for later analysis. Through the van's grimy windows, she observed the gradual transition from urban sprawl to industrial wasteland. The deteriorating infrastructure and increasing intervals between streetlights indicated they were heading toward the old manufacturing district. Perfect territory for hideouts, plenty of abandoned buildings, minimal civilian traffic, and multiple escape routes. As a Delta Force operator, she had conducted training exercises in similar environments across the globe. The familiar territory almost made her smile, but she maintained her carefully crafted facade of fearful compliance. Powell's nervous energy manifested in constant movement, drumming fingers on the steering wheel, frequent mirror checks, and muttered curses at every red light. Sarah recognized the signs of someone operating on pure adrenaline, their decision-making increasingly compromised by stress and fear. His behavior presented both an opportunity and a potential complication. An agitated captor could make mistakes she could exploit, but unpredictability could also lead to dangerous impulsivity. The prison-issue boots they wore created distinct scuff patterns on the van's floor, suggesting they hadn't managed to acquire new footwear since their escape. Based on the wear patterns, Sarah estimated they had covered significant ground on foot before acquiring the van. This detail, combined with their obvious fatigue, indicated they had been free for less than 24 hours. Their desperation was evident in the hasty nature of her abduction, a decision that would prove to be their ultimate undoing. Drake's occasional attempts at intimidating banter revealed more than he intended. His references to past crimes and prison hierarchy painted a picture of someone who maintained authority through brute force rather than intelligence. "You picked a good one, Powell," he said at one point, his attempt at humor masking underlying anxiety. "Nice and quiet, aren't you, lady?" Sarah responded with a perfectly calibrated whimper, feeding his false sense of control while internally marking him as the most likely to resort to violence when things went wrong. The rain intensified as they traveled, drumming against the van's metal roof and reducing visibility. Sarah noted how this environmental factor affected her captors. Powell's driving became more tentative, Drake's commands more frequent and agitated, while Reeves maintained his calculated observation. The weather would work to her advantage, providing both cover and distraction when she made her move. Years of operating in adverse conditions had taught her to turn environmental challenges into tactical advantages. As they approached their final destination, the dynamics between the three men became increasingly strained. The initial adrenaline of escape was wearing off, replaced by the weight of reality and the complications introduced by taking a hostage. Sarah detected subtle shifts in their behavior, shorter responses, tenser postures, and increasingly frequent glances in her direction. These changes confirmed what she had already suspected. The decision to kidnap her had been impulsive, not part of their original escape plan. Such deviation from planned operations often led to mistakes, and mistakes were something Sarah had been trained to exploit with lethal efficiency. Throughout the journey, she maintained her role flawlessly, presenting herself as exactly what they assumed: a helpless woman caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Every tremor in her voice, every fearful glance, every subtle shift away from their movements was calculated to reinforce this perception. Inside, however, her mind continued its methodical analysis, preparing for the moment when she would reveal just how catastrophically wrong their assumptions had been. The journey was coming to an end, and with it, their brief taste of freedom. The warehouse loomed before them, a hulking monument to industrial decay set against the stormy sky. As Powell guided the van through a rusted security gate, Sarah's trained eye immediately began cataloging tactical details. The building's weathered brick exterior was tagged with graffiti, but beneath the urban decay, She recognized the sturdy construction of a former automotive parts facility. 3 access points were immediately visible: the main loading dock where they were entering, a fire escape on the eastern wall, and what appeared to be a partially concealed service entrance on the building's northern face. The van's headlights cut through the darkness of the warehouse interior, illuminating a space that perfectly matched her captor's amateur status. Empty wooden pallets were stacked haphazardly against walls, creating unintentional cover positions that could prove useful in a confrontation. Debris littered the concrete floor: broken glass, discarded machinery parts, and scattered papers that would make silent movement challenging, but not impossible. The high ceiling disappeared into darkness, but Sarah noted the skeletal remains of a catwalk system that could provide both tactical advantage and potential hazards. Drake directed Powell to park near a makeshift living area they had clearly prepared in advance. Tattered office furniture had been arranged around a portable camping lantern, creating an almost pathetic attempt at comfort. Food wrappers and empty water bottles suggested they had stocked supplies, though not efficiently, another sign of their hasty planning. Sarah observed a battery-powered radio scanner on an overturned crate, indicating at least some level of situational awareness, but its outdated model suggested limited effectiveness against modern police frequencies. As they roughly guided her from the van to a metal chair that had seen better days, Sarah noted the building's acoustic properties. Every footstep echoed. Every distant drip of water through the leaking roof created ripples of sound, details that could either betray movement or mask it, depending on how they were used. The chair they secured her to was positioned near a support column, not the center of the room as amateurs might choose. Reeves's influence, she suspected, recognizing the strategic placement that protected their captive from external view while maintaining clear sightlines to all approaches. Drake began pacing, his boots marking an irregular pattern on the dusty floor, as he launched into what he clearly thought was an intimidating monologue about their successful escape. 3 years planning this, he boasted, unaware that each word revealed more about their operation than he intended. The guards never saw it coming. We had the whole thing timed perfect. Sarah listened intently, noting discrepancies between his story and the evidence of their actual preparation. His description of their prison break indicated opportunistic action rather than the calculated planning he claimed. Powell busied himself with their supplies, his movements betraying increasing anxiety as he sorted through their limited resources. The flickering lantern cast shifting shadows across his face, highlighting the sweat beading on his forehead despite the warehouse's cool temperature. Sarah watched as he repeatedly checked his watch, another tell that their timeline was already deviating from whatever plan they had conceived. They had prepared for an escape, but not for managing a hostage situation, a critical oversight she could exploit. Reeves maintained his position near the van, dividing his attention between watching their captive and monitoring the warehouse's entry points. His methodical surveillance pattern impressed Sarah, even as she identified its weaknesses. He was skilled, perhaps former military or law enforcement before his incarceration, but his technique had grown rusty during his imprisonment. The gaps in his observation cycle were small but consistent. 3 to 4 seconds when his attention shifted between zones, moments that could prove decisive when she made her move. The warehouse's infrastructure provided Sarah with additional strategic information. Ancient electrical boxes suggested power could be restored, though her captors hadn't attempted it, likely fearing the attention it might draw. Water damage stains on the walls mapped out the building's plumbing system, indicating a potential route to the roof or neighboring structures. Every detail added to her mental blueprint of the space, preparing her for the moment when she would turn this hastily chosen prison into a weapon against her captors. As the hours crept forward, the dynamics between the three men continued to deteriorate. Drake's initial bravado gave way to sharp commands and increasingly aggressive posturing. Powell's nervous energy transformed into visible panic as he realized the full implications of their situation. Only Reeves maintained his composure, though Sarah detected growing tension in his shoulders as he witnessed his companion's declining mental states. The fragile alliance that had facilitated their escape was beginning to fracture under the pressure of their circumstances. The warehouse's darkness seemed to deepen with the setting sun, shadows stretching like fingers across the concrete floor. Sarah tested her restraints subtly, confirming what she had suspected. Their amateur knots would take seconds to escape when the time came. She observed how the failing light affected her captors' behavior, noting their increasing reliance on the lantern and the way it compromised their night vision. Each detail would play a role in her response, crafted through years of experience in precisely this type of situation. Thunder rolled overhead, the storm intensifying as night fell completely. Water began to leak through the roof in multiple locations, creating a chaotic symphony of drips and splashes that would provide excellent audio cover. The warehouse's vast space, once an industrial powerhouse, now served as an echo chamber for nature's fury and human desperation. Sarah remained still in her chair, every sense attuned to her surroundings and her captors, waiting for the perfect moment to remind these men that appearances, especially hers, could be dangerously deceiving. The moment of revelation began with a simple request for water. Drake, perhaps feeling generous in his perceived victory, approached Sarah with a plastic bottle. His swagger betrayed his complete ignorance of the storm about to break. The warehouse's dim lighting cast long shadows across his face as he leaned forward, completely unaware that this simple act of supposed kindness would be his undoing. Sarah had been waiting patiently, cataloging every movement, every pattern, every weakness, and now the perfect opportunity presented itself. In the fraction of a second before she moved, Sarah's mind shifted into the crystalline clarity she had experienced countless times in combat. Her senses heightened, time seemed to slow, and every detail of her surroundings came into razor-sharp focus. The distance between her and Drake, 4 feet. Powell's position. By the van, attention divided between his phone and the entrance. Reeves, the most dangerous, but momentarily distracted by a sound from the warehouse's upper level. The conditions were perfect. The first move was so swift, so precisely executed, that Drake's brain hadn't even registered the change before he found himself airborne. Sarah's restraints, which she had gradually loosened over hours, fell away like autumn leaves. Her hands, trained through thousands of repetitions, found familiar purchase on Drake's arm. Using his own forward momentum, she executed a textbook hip throw that sent him crashing into the concrete floor with a force that drove the air from his lungs. The water bottle spiraled away, creating a shimmering arc in the lantern light. Powell's reaction was predictable, exactly as her tactical assessment had anticipated. He charged forward, abandoning all pretense of strategic thinking in favor of raw aggression. Sarah met his rush with calculated precision, years of close-quarters combat training manifesting in a devastating combination. A strike to the solar plexus, followed by an elbow to the jaw as he doubled over, and Powell joined Drake on the warehouse floor. The entire exchange lasted less than 3 seconds. Reeves, true to her earlier assessment, proved himself the most intelligent of the three. As Sarah squared to face him, her stance shifting seamlessly into a combat-ready position, she saw the recognition dawn in his eyes. This was no ordinary hostage. The way she moved, the efficiency of her takedowns, the absolute control she maintained over the situation. He raised his hands slowly, a gesture of surrender born of genuine understanding rather than fear. "Delta Force," Sarah announced, her voice carrying the weight of authority she had temporarily masked. The words fell into the warehouse's stunned silence like stones into still water. Drake, still struggling to regain his breath, stared up at her with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. Powell, nursing his jaw, seemed unable to process the dramatic reversal of their situation. "Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, U.S. Army Delta Force. You gentlemen picked the wrong woman to kidnap." The following moments unfolded with military precision. Sarah secured Drake with his own zip ties, the irony not lost on any of them. Her movements were efficient, professional, demonstrating the years of training that separated her from common criminals. As she secured Powell, she noted the look of resignation replacing his earlier panic, the realization that their escape attempt had led them straight into the hands of one of the military's most elite operators. Using the burner phone she found in Drake's pocket, Sarah contacted local law enforcement. Her tone was clipped, professional, as she provided their location and situation status. The warehouse's shadows seemed to retreat from her commanding presence, the space no longer a prison, but a testament to how quickly fortune could turn. As red and blue lights began to flash through the broken windows, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The night had certainly not gone as planned, for any of them. In the end, it was Reeves who broke the tense silence that had fallen over the group. "We should have done a background check on our hostages," he said, a hint of dark humor in his voice. Sarah acknowledged the comment with a slight nod, appreciating the irony of their situation. They had planned their prison escape meticulously, but failed to account for the possibility that their randomly chosen victim might be more dangerous than they were. The sound of approaching sirens filled the warehouse as local law enforcement and FBI teams converged on their location. Sarah maintained her vigilance, knowing that desperate criminals could be most dangerous in their final moments of freedom. But these men seemed to have accepted their fate, their brief taste of freedom ending in a way none of them could have anticipated. As FBI agents breached the warehouse entrance, Sarah stood ready to brief them, her bearing every inch the Delta Force commander she had hidden beneath a civilian disguise. The revelation of her identity had transformed not just the physical dynamics of their situation, but the entire psychology of their interaction. What had begun as a simple grocery store abduction had become a stark reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one you least suspect. For Sarah, it was just another day of being underestimated, a misconception she had learned to use to her advantage throughout her remarkable career. The debriefing room at Delta Force headquarters hummed with an unusual energy the following morning. The fluorescent lights cast a stark glow over the polished conference table where Sarah Mitchell sat, her posture perfect despite the previous night's events. Before her lay 3 folders containing the complete files of Drake, Powell, and Reeves, information that would have been useful 24 hours earlier. The irony wasn't lost on her that these files had been waiting in her inbox when she'd stopped for groceries. Colonel James Richardson, her commanding officer, leaned back in his chair, trying and failing to suppress an amused smile as Sarah delivered her report with characteristic precision. Her account was methodical, detailed, each event catalogued with military efficiency. Yet there was something almost comical about how 3 escaped convicts had inadvertently attempted to kidnap one of the most lethal operators in the U.S. military special operations community. "Let me get this straight, Mitchell," Richardson interrupted, running a hand through his silver hair. "You allowed them to take you captive because you recognized them as the escaped prisoners from the Alert." Sarah's response was measured, professional. "Affirmative, sir. It presented the most efficient way to locate their hideout and ensure their recapture. Direct confrontation in the parking lot would have risked civilian casualties, and potential escape routes remained numerous at that location." The incident was already sending ripples through various agencies. The FBI was particularly interested in how 3 escaped prisoners had inadvertently aided in their own capture by kidnapping a Delta Force commander. The official report would be studied in training scenarios for years to come. A perfect example of maintaining cover, gathering intelligence, and choosing the optimal moment to strike. Sarah's methodical analysis of her captors' personalities and behaviors had proven instrumental in determining the best approach to their takedown. Beyond the official documentation, the story had taken on a life of its own within the special operations community. Sarah's colleagues could barely contain their appreciation for the cosmic irony of the situation. The break room was already buzzing with embellished versions of how she had systematically dismantled 3 escaped convicts, while they remained blissfully unaware of her true identity. She accepted their good-natured ribbing with grace, though her slight smile suggested she shared in their appreciation of the situation's absurdity.